Somewhere off the coast of Cornwall, England, a cable no thicker than a garden hose comes up out of the Atlantic Ocean. It has traveled almost 4,000 miles. It has survived pressure that would crush a submarine, temperatures near freezing, and the complete darkness of the ocean floor. And when it finally reaches land, it doesn't go to an office building. It doesn't go to a server farm with a company logo on the front. It disappears into a windowless concrete structure with no signage, reinforced walls, and armed security that most people walking past would mistake for a water treatment plant. Here's the number that should stop you. 99% of all data traveling between continents, every email, every video call, every stock trade, every classified government cable moves through structures like this one, not satellites. Satellites carry a rounding error's worth of global traffic. The internet, the thing you assume lives in the cloud, is actually a physical object. It is wet, it is heavy, and it comes ashore in buildings designed to survive an attack. The obvious explanation is that this is just infrastructure. Boring, unglamorous, the digital equivalent of a water main. Nothing to see here. But that explanation falls apart the moment you ask why a water main needs blast-resistant doors, why it needs its own security clearance system, and why several governments treat the location of these buildings as a matter of national security. By the end of this video, you'll understand why a handful of unmarked concrete boxes scattered across remote coastlines are, quietly, some of the most fought-over real estate on Earth, and what happens to your life the moment one of them goes down. The first explanation people reach for is simple. Surely we don't need cables anymore, because we have satellites. This isn't a crazy guess. Satellite internet has gotten genuinely good. Starlink alone has launched thousands of satellites, and for someone living somewhere remote, it feels like it has replaced the need for cables entirely. But satellites lose to cables in the one category that matters most for global data. Speed of light through glass beats. Speed of light through vacuum plus atmosphere plus signal processing every single time. A fiber optic cable across the Atlantic can move data in under 60 milliseconds. A geostationary satellite round trip can take over 500. For a text message, that's invisible. For a Wall Street trading algorithm executing a transaction in New York based on a price in London, that gap is the difference between profit and loss. Satellites are a backup system. Cables are the actual internet. The second explanation is that maybe these buildings are simply data centers, the big warehouses full of servers that companies like Google and Amazon operate. This one is closer, but still misses the target. A data center stores and processes information. A cable landing station does something different. It's the physical handoff point where an undersea cable's optical signal gets converted, amplified, and routed onto land-based networks. Think of it less like a warehouse and more like a border crossing. Nothing is stored there in the way people imagine, but everything passes through. There's a fourth guess worth taking seriously too, because it's the one you've probably heard as a joke. Sharks. Footage of sharks biting undersea cables has circulated for years, and Google even reinforced sections of some of its cables, with a Kevlar-like wrapping partly in response to shark bite incidents. But shark bites account for a small fraction of cable damage worldwide. The real culprit, year after year, is far less exotic: fishing trawlers and ship anchors. Roughly 2/3 of all cable faults happen in shallow coastal waters, where a dragging anchor or a trawler's net can slice through a line lying on the seabed. That's a real vulnerability. But it explains damage to the cable itself, not why the building on land needs to look like a fortress. The fifth explanation, and the one closest to a nervous truth, is that this is all about government surveillance. And there's real history behind that instinct. Landing stations have absolutely been used as choke points for intelligence gathering, and we'll get into exactly how later. But treating that as the whole story misses something bigger. These stations are fortified this heavily because of what happens to a country's economy, military coordination. and emergency services in the minutes after one of them goes dark. A risk that has nothing to do with spies and everything to do with sheer physical dependency. So if it's not just satellites, not just data storage, and not just surveillance, what is actually going on inside these buildings? And why does the whole system depend on protecting a few dozen unmarked patches of coastline? Layer 1. Why does the cable even need a building at all? Picture the cable itself first. Standard undersea cables are startlingly thin, about the diameter of a garden hose for most of their length, thickening near shore where they need protection from anchors and fishing trawlers. Inside that hose-sized bundle sit optical fibers thinner than a human hair, each one capable of carrying enormous amounts of information as pulses of light. But light degrades over distance. Send a laser pulse from Virginia to Bilbao, Spain, roughly the route of Facebook and Microsoft's Maria cable. And by the time it arrives, it needs to have been boosted along the way by repeaters embedded in the cable every 40 to 60 miles. When it finally reaches shore, that light signal has to be converted into an electrical signal, decoded, verified, and handed off to terrestrial fiber networks that connect to internet exchanges, cloud providers, and telecom backbones. That conversion, from undersea optical pulse to usable land-based data, can't happen in the open. It requires climate-controlled rooms, backup power, and physical security, because the equipment doing the conversion is now the single point where an entire transatlantic data route either works or doesn't. That's why the building exists. And when something does go wrong out at sea, fixing it isn't quick. A small fleet of specialized cable repair ships, based in ports around the world, is on permanent standby for exactly this. When a cable breaks, one of these ships sails to the coordinates, uses a grappling hook to snag the cable off the seafloor from thousands of feet below, hauls it to the surface, splices in a new section in a process that can take days per repair, and lowers it back down. A single repair can cost well over $1 million, and if multiple faults happen at once, as they did during the 2008 Mediterranean incident, the small global fleet of repair ships simply can't be everywhere at once, and countries wait in a queue for their turn. Now the question becomes, why does the building where the cable finally comes ashore need to look like a bunker instead of an office park? Layer 2. The answer is concentration risk, and it's more extreme than most people realize. There are roughly 550 active and planned submarine cables in the world, but they don't land in 550 places. They cluster. A small number of coastal towns, Bude in England, Tuckerton in New Jersey, Mumbai's western shoreline, a stretch of Cornish coast, Marseille in France, handle a wildly disproportionate share of intercontinental traffic. Imagine every road connecting two continents funneling down to 5 or 6 bridges. That's the real geography of the internet. Egypt is the starkest example. A huge share of the cables connecting Europe to Asia and the Middle East are forced to pass through a narrow land corridor near the Suez Canal, because it's the shortest overland route between the Mediterranean and the Red Sea. That means a disruption in a single country, along a strip of land just a few miles wide, can degrade internet performance for millions of people thousands of miles away who have never heard of it. And a system that concentrated has a single point of failure built into its foundation. In 2008, a series of cable cuts in the Mediterranean, some caused by ship anchors, one possibly deliberate, knocked out significant internet capacity across Egypt, India, and the Middle East within hours, disrupting banking and business operations across multiple countries. That's not a hypothetical. That already happened, from damage to just a handful of physical lines. Once you understand how few choke points the entire system actually funnels through, you start to understand why the buildings at those choke points are treated less like utilities and more like strategic assets, which raises an uncomfortable next question. Assets worth protecting from what? Exactly. Layer 3. From sabotage and from each other. This is where the story stops being about accidents and starts being about deliberate human intent. Undersea cables have become tools and targets of state power. Cable landing stations have long been documented as intelligence collection points. Historical reporting on programs run by agencies including the NSA and GCHQ has described how landing stations, including sites in the UK, were used to tap into cable traffic passing through Allied infrastructure. More recently, the concern has flipped toward physical sabotage. In late 2023 and through 2024 and 2025, multiple undersea cables and pipelines in the Baltic Sea were severed or damaged in incidents investigators linked to ships dragging anchors, with several European governments and NATO officials publicly raising the possibility of deliberate interference tied to regional tensions with Russia. When a country's leadership starts describing internet cables in the same breath as pipelines and military infrastructure, you're no longer talking about plumbing. You're talking about critical national infrastructure that happens to be sitting, mostly unguarded, on the seafloor, which is exactly why the small number of buildings where those cables finally come ashore have become the one place in the whole system where a nation actually can post a guard. Layer 4. And that's the paradox at the center of the entire system. The most vulnerable stretch of this multi-thousand-mile network isn't the thousands of miles of open ocean. It's the last few hundred meters, where the cable comes ashore and enters a building. You cannot fortify an ocean floor. You cannot put an armed guard on every mile of cable between New Jersey and Portugal. But you absolutely can fortify a single building where dozens of cables converge into a handful of racks of equipment. That's why landing stations have reinforced concrete construction rated to withstand storms and physical assault, why some have blast-resistant doors, why entry requires multiple layers of security clearance, and why many governments classify the precise locations and technical specifications of these buildings. Even though satellite imagery means the buildings themselves aren't exactly secret, the concrete box isn't overkill. It's the only choke point in the whole system small enough to actually defend. Once you see the system this way, ordinary moments in your own life start looking different. That video call with a relative overseas, that online purchase from a retailer on another continent, that split-second stock trade your retirement fund's algorithm just executed. Every one of them is riding a beam of light through a hose-thin cable, surfacing inside an unmarked concrete building, and getting handed off by machines sitting behind a reinforced door somewhere you will never see. The 2008 Mediterranean cable cuts didn't just cause an abstract inconvenience. For a stretch of hours, banking systems, business operations, and everyday internet access across multiple countries simply degraded because the physical shortcut those countries depended on had been severed. The Baltic Sea incidents didn't just damage cables, they forced NATO to start openly discussing undersea infrastructure as a domain of potential warfare, the same way it discusses airspace or territorial waters. And in January 2022, when an underwater volcanic eruption near Tonga severed the single cable connecting that island nation to the rest of the world, the entire country dropped almost completely offline for weeks. No reliable banking, no international calls, aid coordination slowed at the exact moment it was needed most. All because one nation's entire digital connection to the planet ran through one physical line with no backup. This is the ripple effect of understanding the real mechanism. The internet stops feeling like an abstract cloud and starts feeling like what it actually is, a physical, finite, geographically concentrated system with real choke points, real vulnerabilities, and real buildings where a government decision, a dragged anchor, or a single act of sabotage can measurably slow down a continent. Here's the detail that reframes everything. The world's dependence on this system isn't shrinking, it's accelerating. AI data centers are driving an unprecedented boom in new submarine cable construction, with tech companies now funding and owning entire cables outright instead of leasing space on shared ones, because the sheer volume of data moving between continents to train and run AI models has outgrown what the existing choke points can handle. Which means the number of unmarked concrete buildings quietly running the global economy isn't going down. It's multiplying. And so is the number of places where dragging one anchor or making one deliberate decision could ripple across a continent's economy within hours. Some of the newest cables being planned right now are being routed deliberately away from geopolitical flashpoints entirely, adding thousands of extra miles and hundreds of millions of dollars in cost, purely to avoid waters where a government or a hostile actor might be tempted to interfere. That alone tells you how seriously the people building this system take the risk we've just spent the last several minutes uncovering. The next time you send a message across an ocean, somewhere out there, a beam of light is surfacing into a concrete room with no sign on the door. And for one brief moment, the entire modern world is passing through it. If stories like this, the hidden infrastructure running everyday life, are the kind of thing that keeps your brain occupied at 1 a.m., that's exactly what this channel exists for. We dig up the systems hiding in plain sight, the ones nobody explains because everyone assumes somebody else already understands them. Subscribe, and let's keep pulling back the curtain together.